Quote, over time, it became clear that North Korea had used Carter to take the heat off, get economic relief, and buy time while continuing to enrich uranium in violation of the agreement. Within a few years, North Korea had built a nuclear arsenal. Now to the Middle East. 1990, he befriended PLO terrorist leader Yasser Arafat. And one book about him, which is a flattering book by a historian named Brinkley, said Carter began coaching Arafat on how not to frighten democracies by using inflammatory rhetoric. Carter thought that Yasser Arafat really wanted peace. Quote, of course, Arafat had no interest in peace, which became crystal clear in the year 2000 when he rejected an offer of Palestinian statehood and launched a campaign of terror known as the Second Intifada instead, end of quote. A lot of people don't know about this. At the end of the Clinton administration, negotiated a deal. Shared supervision of Jerusalem as capital of both states, the state of Palestine and state of Israel. They would share it. They were going to negotiate the so-called right of return, a continuous state called Palestine. But Yasser Arafat had agreed to one thing and one thing only. The terror had to stop. The homicide bombing had to stop. The attacks inside and outside had to stop. Yasser Arafat walked away from that deal and began what was called the Second Intifada. Jimmy Carter, once again, looked like an idiot. On a Middle East trip in 1990, he went to Syria to meet Hafez al-Assad. And he said nothing at all about the dictator's human rights violations, but he went on to Israel and blasted its human rights record. Carter met with and embraced Hamas in 2015, the year after thousands of rockets were fired indiscriminately at Israel civilians. He claimed the group, which in its charter calls for the extermination of Israel, that Hamas was actually committed to peace. And you know who was not? Said Jimmy Carter? Israel. 2007, he published the book I mentioned earlier, Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid. Was one-sided in its attacks on Israel, filled with a bunch of inaccuracies and distortions. He had a line in the book, and he basically said that the terror attacks on Israeli civilians were justified until Israel submits to their demands. Quote, it is imperative that the general Arab community and all significant Palestinian groups make it clear they will end suicide bombings and other acts of terrorism when international laws, and the ultimate goals for the roadmap of peace are accepted by Israel. Close quote. Later on, he claimed the line was a mistake when a bunch of people got upset, but he defended the rest of the book. And when asked about the attacks against his book, Carter said in an interview with Al Jazeera, quote, most of the condemnations of my book come from Jewish American organizations. End of quote. Wow. He complained that the pro-Israel lobby, quote, made it almost politically suicidal for members of Congress to espouse a balanced position between Israel and Palestine. He also said that the negative book reviews in the mainstream media, quote, have been written mostly by representatives of Jewish organizations, end of quote. Wasn't true. But essentially what he's saying is if you're Jewish, and you don't like what he said, you're representing a, quote, Jewish organization. Some people might call that anti-Semitic. Gave a speech at George Washington University on the same book tour. And during the Q&A part, a student asked him about the fact that 14 members of the Carter Center's advisory board had resigned over the book. You know what Carter said? And I'm quoting, "They all happen to be Jewish Americans. I understand the tremendous pressures on them," end of quote. One of those who resigned was a man named Ken Stein. He was a professor at Emory University. He spent decades at the Carter Center. At one time was its first permanent director. He resigned and wrote an attack on the book and said, quote, "While Carter says that he wrote the book to educate and provoke debate, the narrative aims its attack toward Israel, Israeli politicians, and Israel supporters. It contains egregious errors of both commission and omission. He manipulates information, redefines facts, and exaggerates conclusions," end of quote. He gave an example. He said he and Carter were having a meeting with al-Assad of Syria. Stein was a note taker. Stein shared his notes from the meeting. But Carter's account in the book made it seem like Assad was really quite flexible, interested in peace. Stein was there. Stein's the one who took the notes, and says Carter's version of that meeting is dramatically different from what in fact happened. And when Carter ran for re-election in 1980, as I told you, he got stomped, he received a lower share of the Jewish vote than any Democrat candidate since 1920. I wonder why. Klein concludes this, quote, "In the coming days and weeks, there will be an effort to rewrite history and claim that the 39th president was underappreciated and that people have been too hard on him. But the truth is, historians have not been harsh enough. One of the few silver linings that can be offered about Jimmy Carter is that thankfully he was too politically inept to be given the opportunity to do more damage," close quote, i.e. a one-termer. Thanks for watching these clips from The Larry Elder Show. If you enjoyed this content, be sure to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss a moment. More thought-provoking discussions are just a click away, so stay tuned, and we'll see you in the next one.